politicians. We know others have responsibility, but what responsibility do British politicians have for the financial crisis and the recession that resulted? Peter Mandelson.
I think that although the Labour government, when we came into office after 1997, undid the self-regulating voluntary system of banking and financial regulation that we'd inherited from the Conservatives, and we set up the Financial Services Authority and put all these things under statute. What we should have encouraged the financial services to do was to be more intrusive. They should have been more pressing. They should have looked more closely into what the banks were doing. If they had done that and they had made them stronger, then they would have been better able to stand up to the crisis when it came, when it rolled across the Atlantic.
So it was your responsibility, the government's responsibility, that that wasn't done?
It was our responsibility, first of all, to change the whole regulatory framework, which we did.
No, you did that.
To set up the Financial Services Authority, which we did. We should have encouraged the Financial Services Authority to have been looking more intrusively at what was going on inside the banks.
How much responsibility do you bear for things going wrong?
The primary responsibility is with the banks, their senior management and their boards. And what was clearly going on was that the boards had no idea what their senior managers were doing.
That's the bank's responsibility.
Hold on a moment.
How much do you bear?
Hold on a moment. Let's put the responsibility where it lies. Boards didn't know what senior managers were doing. Many senior managers did not know what middle-ranking managers were doing. Now, what we should have done was to have pressed the Financial Services Authority to look more intrusively at how this was what was going on in the banks. There should have been more transparency. There should have been more corporate responsibility in the banks, and that's why we're going to ensure that that happens in the future.
OK, so Ken Clarke, it basically wasn't the government's fault at all.
No, it was the banks and the government and the regulators on both sides of the Atlantic. The folly of bankers was in Wall Street and in the City of London. The regulatory system was useless in New York, and the regulatory system which Gordon Brown proudly put in place when he took it away from the Bank of England didn't work. It was quite useless. They should have pressed the FSA to do what the FSA wasn't doing. They were taken by surprise when Northern Rock affairs went wrong. It wasn't until the pictures of pensioners queuing around the block appeared on the television that even the regulators, let alone the ministers, seemed to know what to do. And they bear a heavy burden. Hubris of bankers, failure of regulators. The regulatory system was down to Gordon Brown.
I'd like to ask Ken a question, if I may.
Ken, if I could just make one point here. I mean, Ken Clarke, as you know, I took a bit of an interest in Northern Rock after the run. At the time, it was extraordinarily difficult to work out what Tory policy was. And even on the day of nationalisation, George Osborne, the Shadow Chancellor, was saying nationalisation was a bad idea. Now, subsequently, we discovered that Northern Rock's losses were colossal. It would inevitably have fallen into the hands of the state. Based on that apparent misjudgment, why should we expect that a Tory government would do the right thing in a crisis?
Well, on the day the coup started, I was saying, where is the Chancellor, reminding people that the depositors are guaranteed. We then had months of government indecision whilst the thing went wrong, and on the day they finally stepped in and had to nationalise it, as you quite rightly say. I think the Conservatives...
But they were right to nationalise it?
I think they were right to nationalise it.
That's not what your party said.
But you've changed your position.
Well, I wasn't...
at the time.
I was on the front bench. It wasn't on the front bench at the time, but of course they were.
So you disagreed with your own front bench?
Well, Gordon Brown stopped them nationalising it as well. There was indecision in the government. He did in the end. The reason, the last few weeks of delay was caused by Gordon Brown messing about, trying to stop his colleagues nationalising, like he delayed recapitalising the banks by messing about, telling Alistair he couldn't do it.
These two are going to squabble about who did what.
I was there with the freedom of action of the backbenchers.
For Northern Rock, way before I was.
But what we cannot find, let me ask you, because we're talking about responsibility. Let me ask you this question, John Thurzo. We're talking about responsibility here. I cannot find anything in the Lib Dem record to suggest that you were calling for more regulation or warning about the subprime crisis in the run-up to this. You were complicit with the rest.
Well, as a matter of fact, Vince Cable did warn about it, and furthermore...
Not warn about the subprime crisis,
on the Treasury Select Committee, which I was sitting on at the time, we also warned about it. But the critical point that was missing in regulation is that nobody had oversight for systemic risk. There was lots and lots of regulation around all sorts of things, but no one person had responsibility for systemic risk. And there's a second reason, and that is that there has been a culture of testosterone and greed in the city, so that people made money by just circulating money and taking more profit, and that took resource away from real businesses which needed real investment.
Okay. Can you give me a single quote from the Liberal Democrats, from St. Vince or anybody else, about subprime markets in America and the lack of banking regulation?
I can't remember my own quotes from yesterday, so I certainly can't give you a quote from Vince
Your
Cable
party's
from 3
dined
years
out
ago.
and being far-seeing and warning, and we can find no quotes, so you're saying you can't provide them either?
I am saying that I heard Vince Cable in the House of Commons warn about the debt bubble beginning in 23, 24, talking about all of the dangers. I remember being in Washington in 2007 before Northern Rock,
saw it all coming.
talking to Bernard Bernanke, who said subprime was not a problem, and the committee said they thought it was.
So you didn't see it coming either?
We knew no more than anybody else, but of all of the people in politics, Vince Cable made it clear that debt was a serious problem.
Vince warned always about debt, but so did I, so did many other people. And Vince, I always took part in debates with Vince. Vince had no all-seeing insight into what was happening in securitisation of debt.
John Swinney.